The wedding dress hung like a ghost in the corner of Grayson's bedroom, mocking her with its pristine white silk and delicate lace, while the man who was supposed to marry her lay 6 feet under in the Kingfisher Cemetery, shot dead over a poker game 3 weeks before their wedding day in the sweltering summer of 1882. Grace stood at her window on the second floor of her father's general store, watching the dusty main street of Kingfisher, Oklahoma Territory, as wagons rolled past and men on horseback kicked up clouds of red dirt. She was 22 years old, considered nearly a spinster by the town's standards, and now she was without prospects once again. Her father, Richard Grayson, had made it clear that morning over breakfast that she needed to find a husband soon or he would find one for her. The store was doing well, and there were plenty of men who would marry her for the inheritance alone. "I do not need a husband," Grace had told him firmly, her green eyes flashing with defiance as she gripped her coffee cup hard enough to turn her knuckles white. "Every woman needs a husband," her father had replied, his mustache twitching with irritation. "You cannot run this store alone when I am gone, and I am not getting any younger." Grace had stormed away from the table without another word, her long auburn hair swinging behind her in its braid. She knew her father meant well, but the thought of marrying someone simply for convenience made her stomach turn. She had loved Thomas, or at least she had thought she did. Now she wondered if she had the capacity to love anyone at all. Her mother had died when she was young, and her father had raised her with a firm hand and little affection. She had learned to be self-sufficient, to keep her emotions locked away where they could not hurt her. The bell above the store's front door chimed, and Grace heard her father greeting a customer. She sighed and smoothed down her simple blue cotton dress before heading downstairs to help. The store was busy, as it always was on Saturday mornings. Farmers came in from their homesteads to buy supplies, and cowboys drifted through town between cattle drives. Grace was measuring out flour for Mrs. Henderson when the door opened again, and a man walked in who made her pause mid-scoop. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out his dusty brown shirt. His hat was pulled low over his eyes, but she could see a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble. He moved with the easy confidence of someone who was comfortable in his own skin, his spurs jingling softly with each step. "Can I help you?" Grace asked, finishing with Mrs. Henderson and turning her attention to the stranger. He pushed his hat back, revealing dark brown eyes that seemed to take in everything about her in one sweeping glance. "I need supplies," he said, his voice deep and rough like gravel. "I will be working at the Parker Ranch for the next few months." Grace nodded and pulled out her ledger. "Name?" "Tucker Vaughn," he said. She wrote it down, trying to ignore the way her hand trembled slightly. There was something about this man that unsettled her, though she could not put her finger on what it was. "What do you need?" Tucker rattled off a list of items: coffee, tobacco, rope, and a new canteen, and Grace moved around the store gathering everything. She was acutely aware of his eyes following her, watching her every movement. When she set everything on the counter, their hands brushed as he reached for the tobacco, and she felt a jolt of electricity run up her arm. "That will be $2.50, she said, pulling her hand back quickly. Tucker counted out the money and placed it on the counter. "You are Richard Grayson's daughter?" "I am," Grace said warily. "Why?" "Just making conversation," Tucker said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Small town, people talk." "I am sure they do," Grace said stiffly. She knew exactly what people said about her. The stubborn Grayson girl who could not keep a man, the one with a sharp tongue and no patience for foolishness. Tucker picked up his supplies and tipped his hat to her. "Thank you, Miss Grayson. I am sure I will be seeing you around." Grace watched him leave, feeling oddly flustered. She shook her head and forced herself to focus on the next customer. She did not have time for distractions, especially not from some drifter cowboy who would probably be gone in a few months anyway. But Tucker Vaughn did not leave Kingfisher. Over the next few weeks, Grace found herself running into him more often than seemed coincidental. He came into the store every Saturday without fail, always polite, always watching her with those dark, knowing eyes. He never said much beyond the necessary pleasantries, but there was something in the way he looked at her that made her feel exposed, as if he could see through all her carefully constructed walls. One particularly hot afternoon in late July, Grace was inventorying the stock in the back room when she heard raised voices from the front of the store. She hurried out to find her father arguing with a man she recognized as Bill Thornton, a local rancher with a reputation for being mean when he drank. "I said I would pay you next week," Thornton was saying, his words slurred. "You calling me a liar?" "I am saying you already owe me for last month," her father said firmly but carefully. He was a small man, and Thornton had at least 50 pounds on him. "I cannot extend any more credit until you settle your account." Thornton's face turned red, and he took a threatening step forward. "Maybe I should just take what I need and you can add it to my tab." Grace moved quickly, positioning herself between her father and Thornton. "You need to leave," she said, her voice cold and steady despite the fear racing through her veins. Thornton laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Or what? You going to throw me out yourself, girl?" "No, but I will," came a voice from behind Thornton. Grace looked past the angry rancher to see Tucker standing in the doorway, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. He did not look threatening exactly, but there was steel in his eyes that made it clear he was not bluffing. Thornton turned, swaying slightly. "This is none of your business, cowboy." "I am making it my business," Tucker said easily. "The lady asked you to leave. I suggest you listen." For a moment, Grace thought Thornton was going to do something stupid. His hand twitched toward his own gun, but then he seemed to think better of it. He spat on the floor, narrowly missing Grace's skirt, and stumbled toward the door. "This is not over," he muttered as he pushed past Tucker. Tucker watched him go, waiting until Thornton was well down the street before turning back to Grace and her father. "You folks all right?" "We are fine," Grace said quickly, irritated by the rush of gratitude she felt. She did not like feeling indebted to anyone. "Thank you for your assistance, but we could have handled it." Tucker raised an eyebrow. "I am sure you could have," he said, and there was that amusement again, as if he found her entertaining. "But it seemed like the decent thing to do." Richard Grayson stepped forward, offering his hand. "Thank you, son, I appreciate it. Bill Thornton is a mean drunk." "He is a problem," Tucker agreed, shaking the older man's hand. "You might want to refuse him service from now on." "I believe I will," Richard said. He glanced at Grace, then back at Tucker, and something passed over his face that made Grace's stomach sink. She knew that look. Her father was getting ideas. Sure enough, later that evening when they closed the store, Richard brought it up. "That Tucker Vaughn is a good man," he said casually as they were counting the day's earnings. "He is a customer," Grace said flatly. "He is single from what I hear," her father continued, ignoring her tone. "Makes good money at the Parker Ranch. Young, strong, capable." "I am not interested," Grace said, slamming the cash drawer shut harder than necessary. "You need to be interested in someone," her father said, his voice taking on that stern quality that meant he was about to deliver a lecture. "You are not getting any younger, Grace. And after what happened with Thomas, people are starting to talk." "Let them talk," Grace said, spinning to face him. "I do not care what people think." "Well, I do," Richard said, his face reddening. I care that my daughter is going to end up alone because she is too stubborn and prideful to see a good opportunity when it presents itself." "A good opportunity," Grace said, her voice rising. "Is that what marriage is to you? An opportunity? A business transaction?" "In this world, sometimes it has to be," her father said. "Not all of us have the luxury of marrying for love." "Then I would rather not marry at all," Grace said, and she turned and walked out of the store, leaving her father sputtering behind her. She walked without thinking, her feet carrying her to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to open prairie. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the evening breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and grass. Grace wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the familiar ache of loneliness settle in her chest. The truth was, she was difficult to love. She knew that about herself. She was too independent, too sharp-tongued, too unwilling to compromise. Thomas had been patient with her, but even he had complained about her stubbornness. And now he was gone, and she was alone again, and maybe that was exactly what she deserved. "You should not be out here by yourself this late," came a familiar voice from behind her. Grace turned to find Tucker sitting on his horse, silhouetted against the darkening sky. She had not heard him approach. "I can take care of myself," she said automatically. Tucker dismounted and walked his horse closer. "I do not doubt that," he said, "but that does not mean you should have to." "What do you want?" Grace asked, suddenly tired of fighting, of always having to be strong and self-sufficient. Tucker studied her for a long moment. "I want to know if you are all right," he said simply. The genuine concern in his voice caught her off guard. "I am fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word, betraying her. "You do not look fine," Tucker said gently. He tied his horse to a nearby fence post and walked over to where she stood. "Want to talk about it?" "Not particularly," Grace said, but she did not move away when he came to stand beside her. They stood in silence for a while, watching the last of the sunset fade into twilight. Finally, Grace said, "My father wants me to get married. He thinks I need a husband to take care of me." "Do you want to get married?" Tucker asked. Grace laughed bitterly. "I do not know what I want anymore. I thought I did, but then Thomas died and now everything feels uncertain." "Thomas was your fiancé," Tucker said. "It was not a question." "He was," Grace said. "We were supposed to get married 3 weeks after he died. He was shot in a saloon over a stupid poker game." "I am sorry," Tucker said, and he sounded like he meant it. Grace shrugged, trying to appear indifferent even as old pain flared in her chest. "It does not matter now. What is done is done." "It matters if it is still hurting you," Tucker said. Grace turned to look at him, surprised by his insight. In the fading light, his face was all shadows and sharp angles, but his eyes were soft. "I barely knew him," she admitted, the words coming out before she could stop them. "We were together for 6 months and I barely knew him at all. And now I am supposed to marry someone else, some stranger who wants my father's store, and I cannot do it. I cannot pretend to feel something I do not feel." "Then do not," Tucker said. "It is not that simple," Grace said. "My father is not going to live forever. Someone needs to take care of the store, and he will not leave it to me unless I have a husband. That is just how things are." "That is how things are if you let them be," Tucker said. "But maybe you are stronger than you think you are." Grace looked at him sharply. "You do not know anything about me." "I know you stood up to Bill Thornton today without flinching," Tucker said. "I know you run that store better than your father does. I know you have been watching me every time I come in, trying to figure me out." Grace felt her cheeks heat. "I have not been watching you." "Yes, you have," Tucker said, and there was a smile in his voice. "And I have been watching you too." The admission hung between them, charged with possibility. Grace's heart was beating fast, but she forced herself to take a step back. "I should go home," she said. "It is getting dark." "Let me walk you back," Tucker said. "I can walk myself," Grace said, but Tucker was already untying his horse. "I know you can," he said, "but I would feel better if you let me do it anyway." Grace wanted to argue, but the truth was she did not want to be alone right now. So she nodded, and they walked back toward town together, Tucker leading his horse beside them. They did not talk much, but the silence was comfortable, and when they reached the store, Grace felt oddly reluctant to say goodnight. "Thank you," she said, surprised to find she meant it. "Anytime," Tucker said. He tipped his hat to her and swung back up into his saddle. "Sleep well, Grace." She watched him ride away, feeling something shift inside her chest. It was dangerous, this feeling, and she knew she should push it away before it took root. But as she climbed the stairs to her room, she could not stop thinking about the way Tucker had said her name, like it was something precious. Over the next few weeks, Tucker found excuses to come into town more often. He always stopped by the store, buying small things he probably did not need, lingering to talk with Grace when the store was not busy. He told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about drifting from ranch to ranch looking for work and purpose. Grace found herself opening up to him in return, telling him things she had never told anyone about her fears and dreams, her frustration with her father, her grief over her mother's death. "I think I am broken somehow," she told him one evening when he had stayed to help her close up the store. Her father had gone to a town council meeting, leaving them alone. "Everyone else seems to find love so easily, but I cannot. I do not know if I even know how." Tucker set down the broom he had been using and came to stand in front of her. "You are not broken," he said firmly. "You are just careful." "There is nothing wrong with that." "My father thinks there is," Grace said. "He says I am too difficult, too stubborn. He says no man will want to put up with me." "Then those men are fools," Tucker said. His eyes were intense, boring into hers. "Grace, you are the strongest, most capable woman I have ever met. You are smart and brave and beautiful, and any man would be lucky to have you." Grace's breath caught in her throat. "You do not mean that." "I do," Tucker said, and he took a step closer. "I mean every word." Grace felt her walls cracking, all those carefully constructed defenses crumbling under the weight of his sincerity. "Tucker, I am difficult to love," she warned, needing him to understand. "I am stubborn and opinionated, and I do not know how to be soft or yielding or any of those things men want in a wife." Tucker reached out and took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. "Then I will love you harder," he said simply. "I will love you so hard that your stubbornness will not matter. I will love you through every argument, every fight, every moment you try to push me away. I will love you until you believe that you deserve it." Tears sprang to Grace's eyes, shocking her. She could not remember the last time she had cried. "You do not know what you are saying," she whispered. "I know exactly what I am saying," Tucker said. He raised his free hand and gently wiped away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "I am saying I want to court you properly. I want to prove to you that you are not difficult to love. You are worth loving." "My father will never approve," Grace said, even as hope bloomed in her chest. "He wants me to marry someone established, someone with property and prospects. Then we will change his mind," Tucker said. "Together." Grace looked up at him, seeing the determination in his eyes, and something inside her gave way. She had been fighting alone for so long, building walls to keep everyone out, but maybe it was time to let someone in. Maybe it was time to trust that she could be loved just as she was. "All right," she said softly. "All right, you can court me." Tucker's face broke into a smile that transformed his entire face, making him look younger and more carefree. "You mean it." "I mean it," Grace said, and before she could second-guess herself, she stood on her toes and kissed him. It was a brief kiss, barely more than a press of lips, but it sent electricity coursing through her entire body. Tucker froze for a moment, then pulled her closer, deepening the kiss until Grace's head was spinning and her knees felt weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, ready to fall. "I should go," Tucker said, his voice rough. "Before your father comes back and finds us like this." Grace nodded, reluctantly stepping back. Her lips felt swollen and she could still feel the imprint of his hands on her waist. "When will I see you again?" "Tomorrow," Tucker said immediately. "And the day after that. And every day after that if you will let me." Grace smiled, a real genuine smile that felt foreign on her face. "I will let you," she said. Tucker kissed her once more, quick and fierce, then grabbed his hat and headed for the door. He paused at the threshold, looking back at her. "You are going to fall in love with me, Grace Grayson," he said confidently. "Just you wait and see." After he left, Grace stood in the middle of the store, touching her lips and wondering if she was already falling. The next morning, Grace woke with a strange feeling of anticipation that she had not felt in years. She dressed carefully, choosing her best dress, a deep green cotton that brought out her eyes, and took extra time with her hair, leaving it down in loose waves instead of her usual tight braid. When she came downstairs for breakfast, her father looked at her suspiciously. "Why are you all dressed up?" he asked, pouring coffee with a shaky hand. "No reason," Grace said, trying to sound casual. "I just felt like making an effort today." Richard grunted but did not push further. They ate in companionable silence, and then Grace helped him open the store. She tried not to watch the door, tried not to jump every time the bell chimed. But as the morning wore on with no sign of Tucker, she began to wonder if she had imagined the whole thing. Maybe he had changed his mind. Maybe in the clear light of day, he had realized that she was not worth the trouble. But then, just before noon, the door opened and Tucker walked in carrying a bouquet of wildflowers. Grace's heart leaped into her throat. He was wearing clean clothes, his hair still damp from washing, and he looked nervous in a way she had never seen him before. "Good morning, Miss Grayson," he said formally, very aware of her father watching from behind the counter. "I brought you these." Grace took the flowers, feeling her cheeks heat. "Thank you, they are beautiful." "Not as beautiful as you," Tucker said, and her father made a choking sound. "What is going on here?" Richard demanded, coming around the counter with his eyes narrowed. Tucker squared his shoulders and turned to face the older man. "Mr. Grayson, I would like your permission to court your daughter." Richard looked between Tucker and Grace, his mustache twitching in that way it did when he was agitated. "Is that so? And what makes you think you are good enough for my Grace?" "Nothing," Tucker said honestly. "I do not think I am good enough for her, but I think I could make her happy if she would let me try." Richard crossed his arms, clearly not impressed. "You are a ranch hand. You have no property, no prospects beyond whatever wages you earn. My daughter deserves better than that." "With all due respect, sir," Tucker said, his voice polite but firm, "your daughter deserves to marry someone who loves her, not someone who wants her for your store." Richard's face turned red. "You have a lot of nerve coming in here and telling me what my daughter deserves." "Papa, please," Grace interjected, setting the flowers down on the counter. "I want Tucker to court me. I am asking you to give him a chance." Richard looked at her, and for a moment his expression softened. "Grace, you could do so much better. What about William Morris? He has been asking after you, and he owns half the cattle in this county." "William Morris is 45 years old and has been married twice already," Grace said flatly. "I do not want to marry him. I want to get to know Tucker." "This is a mistake," Richard said, shaking his head. "But you are too stubborn to listen to reason. You always have been." "Then you give us your permission?" Tucker asked. Richard threw up his hands in exasperation. "Fine. Court her if you must. but do not come crying to me when it falls apart." Grace felt a surge of happiness so intense it almost frightened her. "Thank you, Papa." Richard just grunted and went back to his ledgers, effectively dismissing them both. Tucker caught Grace's eye and tilted his head toward the door. She nodded and followed him outside into the bright sunlight. "That went better than I expected," Tucker said once they were out of earshot. Grace laughed. "He likes you more than he is letting on. If he really disapproved, he would have thrown you out." "Good to know," Tucker said. He offered her his arm. "Can I take you to lunch?" Grace hesitated, glancing back at the store. "I should not leave during the busy hours." "1 hour," Tucker coaxed. "Your father can manage for 1 hour." Grace made a decision and took his arm. "All right. 1 hour." They walked to the small restaurant at the end of the street, Mrs. Patterson's place, which served the best fried chicken in the territory. As they ate, Tucker told her about his morning at the ranch, and Grace found herself laughing at his stories about the ornery cattle and the pranks the other ranch hands played on each other. It felt easy and natural, like they had been doing this for years instead of just starting. "Tell me about your mother," Tucker said as they were finishing their meal. "You mentioned she passed when you were young." Grace set down her fork, the familiar ache settling in her chest. "I was 8 when she died, pneumonia. It happened very fast. 1 week she was fine and the next she was gone." "That must have been hard," Tucker said softly. "It was," Grace admitted. "My father did not know how to handle it. He threw himself into the store, working all the time, and I learned to take care of myself. I think that is where I got my stubbornness from. I had to be strong because no one else was going to be strong for me." Tucker reached across the table and took her hand. "You do not have to be strong all the time anymore. Not with me." Grace felt tears prick her eyes again. She was not used to this, to someone seeing past her defenses to the scared, lonely girl underneath. "I do not know how to be any other way." "Then we will learn together," Tucker said. They walked back to the store hand in hand, and Grace felt like she was floating. When they reached the door, Tucker pulled her aside, into the narrow alley between the store and the building next to it, away from prying eyes. "I have been wanting to do this all morning," he said, and he kissed her. This kiss was different from the one the night before, slower and deeper, full of promise. Grace melted into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders, and for the first time in her life she understood what all the fuss was about. This was what people meant when they talked about love, this feeling of coming home, of finding the place where you belonged. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tucker rested his forehead against hers. "You are going to be the death of me, Grace Grayson," he murmured. "Good," Grace said, and she kissed him again. Over the next few weeks, Grace and Tucker fell into a pattern. He came to town every evening after finishing his work at the ranch, and they would walk together, talking about everything and nothing. Sometimes they went to the church socials or the town dances. Other times they just sat on the porch of the store, watching the stars come out. Grace found herself opening up to him more and more, sharing her dreams of expanding the store, maybe even opening a second location in a nearby town. Tucker listened with genuine interest, asking questions and offering suggestions, never once making her feel like her ambitions were too much or inappropriate for a woman. In turn, Tucker shared his own dreams. He wanted his own ranch someday, a small spread where he could raise horses. He had a gift with horses, a natural way of gentling even the wildest Mustang, and Grace loved watching him work. He took her out to the Parker Ranch one Sunday, and she saw him with the horses, patient and calm, speaking to them in low tones that seemed to work like magic. "You should do this," she told him as they rode back to town, Grace riding behind him on his horse with her arms around his waist. "You should save your money and start your own ranch. Maybe someday," Tucker said, but he did not sound convinced. Why not now? Grace pressed. There is open land available if you file a homestead claim. That takes money I do not have, Tucker said, and time I cannot spare if I want to keep working. Grace was quiet for a moment, thinking, what if I helped you? Tucker pulled the horse to a stop and turned in the saddle to look at her. Grace, I cannot take your money. It is not taking if I am offering, Grace said. The store does well. I have some savings. We could go in together as partners. Partners, Tucker repeated, and something flickered in his eyes. Is that what we are? Grace felt her heart start to race. They had been courting for over a month now, and while they had shared many kisses and held hands constantly, neither of them had said the words yet. Neither had spoken about the future beyond vague possibilities. What do you want us to be? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tucker dismounted and helped her down, then took both her hands in his. Grace, I am in love with you, he said, his dark eyes intense and serious. I have been in love with you since the first day I walked into that store and saw you standing there like you owned the world. I want to marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep holding you every night, if you will have me. Grace felt like all the air had been sucked from her lungs. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Tucker watched her, his expression growing uncertain as the silence stretched between them. I am sorry, he said finally, releasing her hands and taking a step back. I should not have sprung that on you. I know you need time. I just wanted you to know how I felt. Tucker, wait, Grace said, finding her voice. I am not saying no, I am just scared. Of what? Tucker asked gently. Of this, Grace said, gesturing between them, of how much I feel for you. I told you I was difficult to love, and I meant it. What if we get married and you realize I am not what you thought? What if I disappoint you? Tucker closed the distance between them and cupped her face in his hands. Grace, you could never disappoint me. I know exactly who you are. You are stubborn and independent and sometimes prickly as a cactus, and I love all of it. I love you because of those things, not in spite of them. I am scared I will mess this up, Grace admitted, her voice breaking. I do not know how to be a wife. I do not know how to be soft and accommodating. I do not want you to be soft and accommodating, Tucker said. I want you to be you, just as you are. Grace searched his face, looking for any hint of doubt or uncertainty, but all she saw was love. Pure, unconditional love. It terrified her and thrilled her in equal measure. I love you too, she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. I am in love with you and it scares me to death, but I cannot imagine my life without you anymore. Tucker's face broke into a huge smile, and he picked her up and spun her around, making her laugh despite the tears streaming down her face. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Grace kissed him back with everything she had, pouring all her fear and hope and love into it. Marry me, Tucker said when they finally broke apart. Please, Grace, marry me and let me spend the rest of my life proving that you are worth loving. Yes, Grace said, laughing and crying at the same time. Yes, I will marry you. They stood there in the middle of the road, holding each other as the sun set behind them, and Grace felt something she had not felt in years, hope for the future. Real, genuine hope that maybe, just maybe, she had found someone who would not leave her, who would not try to change her, who would love her exactly as she was. Telling her father was harder than Grace had anticipated. When they came back into town and announced their engagement, Richard's face turned stormy. Absolutely not, he said, slamming his hand down on the counter. I gave you permission to court her, not marry her. Papa, please, Grace said. I love him. You love Thomas too, Richard shot back. And look how that turned out. Grace flinched at the cruel words. That is not fair. Life is not fair, Richard said. He turned to Tucker. You have nothing to offer her. No land, no property, no prospects. How do you plan to support a wife? I will find a way, Tucker said steadily. I will work every day of my life to make sure Grace has everything she needs. That is not good enough, Richard said. My daughter deserves security. She deserves a man who can provide for her properly. Papa, I can provide for myself, Grace said angrily. I have been helping run this store since I was 12 years old. I do not need a man to take care of me. Then why marry at all? Richard demanded. Because I want to, Grace said, and the simple truth of it hung in the air between them. I want to marry Tucker because I love him and he loves me. Is that not reason enough? Richard looked at her for a long moment, and some of the anger drained from his face, leaving only sadness. I am trying to protect you, Grace. I do not want to see you hurt again. I know, Grace said softly, going to him and taking his hands. But I am not a little girl anymore. I am old enough to make my own choices, even if they are the wrong ones. This is not the wrong choice, Tucker said quietly. I promise you, sir, I will take care of her. I will love her and cherish her and do everything in my power to make her happy. Richard looked at Tucker, then back at Grace and sighed. You are just like your mother, he said to Grace. Stubborn as the day is long, she would not listen to reason either. Did you regret marrying her? Grace asked. Not for a single day, Richard admitted. His eyes grew misty with memory. She was the best thing that ever happened to me. Then let me have that too, Grace pleaded. Let me have a chance at happiness. Richard was silent for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right. You have my blessing, but if he hurts you, I will shoot him myself. Tucker cracked a small smile. Fair enough, sir. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church, with half the town in attendance. Grace wore the same dress she had planned to wear for her wedding to Thomas. But somehow it felt different now, like she was finally becoming the person she was meant to be. Tucker looked handsome in his best suit, his hair slicked back, and his eyes shining with love as he watched her walk down the aisle on her father's arm. The preacher's words washed over her as she stood next to Tucker, holding his hands and looking into his face. When it came time for the vows, Tucker squeezed her hands gently. I promise to love you in your stubbornness and in your softness, he said, his voice steady and clear. I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you. I promise to love you harder when you try to push me away, and to hold you closer when you need me most. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your lover for all the days of my life. Grace felt tears streaming down her face as she spoke her own vows. I promise to trust you with my heart, even though it scares me. I promise to let you in, even when every instinct tells me to build walls. I promise to love you with everything I have, in the only way I know how, completely and without reservation. I promise to be your wife, your partner, and your home. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Tucker kissed her like he was claiming her, like he was sealing a promise that would last forever. The congregation cheered, and Grace felt something inside her settle, like a missing piece had finally clicked into place. The reception was held at the church hall, with music and dancing and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Grace danced with her father, with Tucker's friends from the ranch, and finally with Tucker himself, who held her close and whispered in her ear about all the things he planned to do once they were alone. You are being very improper, Mr. Vaughn, Grace murmured, her cheeks flushed. You have not seen improper yet, Mrs. Vaughn, Tucker replied, and the possessiveness in his voice sent shivers down her spine. They had rented a small house on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it was theirs. Tucker carried her over the threshold as tradition demanded, and Grace laughed at the display even as her heart raced with anticipation and nervousness. Are you all right? Tucker asked, setting her down gently and searching her face. "We can take this slow if you need to." Grace looked around their little house, at the furniture they had picked out together, at the curtains she had sewn herself, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude and love. "I am not scared," she said, turning back to him. "Not of this, not of you." Tucker kissed her softly, reverently, and then he took her hand and led her to their bedroom. What happened next was tender and passionate and sometimes awkward, because neither of them was very experienced, but it was perfect in its imperfection. Tucker was patient with her, taking his time to learn what she liked, murmuring words of love and praise against her skin, until Grace forgot to be self-conscious, forgot to worry about doing everything right, and simply let herself feel. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the sheets, Grace's head resting on Tucker's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I never thought I could have this," she whispered into the darkness. "I never thought anyone would want me the way you do." Tucker tightened his arms around her. "Then every other man in the world is a fool," he said. "You are everything, Grace. Everything." Grace closed her eyes, feeling the tears come again, but this time they were happy tears. For the first time in her life, she felt truly loved, truly seen. And it was more than she ever could have imagined. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Grace continued to work at her father's store, and Tucker kept his job at the Parker Ranch. But every evening they came home to each other, to their little house that felt more like a home every day. Grace learned to cook, with mixed results that Tucker ate gamely even when her biscuits came out hard as rocks. Tucker taught her to ride properly, not side saddle like a proper lady, but astride like a cowboy. And they spent Sunday afternoons riding out into the prairie together, exploring the land and dreaming about the future. "I have been saving my wages," Tucker told her one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "In another year, I will have enough for a down payment on some land. We could do it sooner if we combined our savings," Grace said. She had been thinking about this for weeks, working the numbers in her head. Tucker shook his head. "Grace, I cannot ask you to do that. That money is yours." "We are married," Grace reminded him. "What is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. That is how this works." "But the store is your inheritance," Tucker protested. "What your father plans to leave you." "My father is healthy as a horse," Grace said. "He will probably outlive us both. Besides, I have been thinking, what if we opened our own store, a general store but focused on ranch supplies? We could locate it closer to the bigger spreads, where ranchers would not have to come all the way into town." Tucker looked at her, his eyes widening. "That is actually a brilliant idea." "I know," Grace said, smiling. "I have already been looking at some properties. There is a piece of land about 10 miles south of here, right at the crossroads where the cattle trail meets the main road to Oklahoma City. It would be perfect." "You have really thought this through," Tucker said, impressed. "I have had a lot of time to think," Grace said. "While you are out working with cattle, I am stuck behind a counter all day. My mind wanders." Tucker pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "You never cease to amaze me, you know that." "I try," Grace said lightly, but inside she glowed with pride. They spent the next few weeks investigating the property Grace had found. It was perfect, a small piece of land with a creek running through it, and enough flat space to build both a store and a house. The current owner was an elderly widower looking to move back east to live with his daughter, and he was willing to sell for a reasonable price. "We could do this," Tucker said, standing on the land and looking around with wonder. "We could really do this." "We can do anything together," Grace said, taking his hand. But their plans hit a snag when Grace's father found out. Richard came to their house one evening, his face red with anger, and demanded to know what they thought they were doing. "You are planning to open a competing store." he said, his voice rising. "After everything I have done for you, after I gave you a job and taught you the business." "Papa, it would not be competing," Grace tried to explain. "We would be serving a different customer base, the ranchers outside of town. It would not hurt your business at all." "That is not the point," Richard said. "The point is loyalty, family loyalty. I expected you to take over the store when I retire, not run off and start your own business." "You expected me to marry someone who would take over the store," Grace corrected. "Someone you approved of, someone who would run things your way. That was never what I wanted." "So you married him instead," Richard said, gesturing at Tucker with contempt. "A ranch hand with big dreams and no sense." "Do not talk about my husband that way," Grace said, her voice cold. "Tucker has more sense in his little finger than most men have in their whole bodies." "Mr. Grayson," Tucker said, stepping forward with his hands raised in a placating gesture. "I understand you are upset, but please hear us out. We are not trying to hurt you or your business. We want to build something of our own, something we can pass on to our children someday. Is not that what you did when you started your store?" Richard's jaw worked as he struggled with his anger. "That was different. I did not have family I was betraying." "You are not betraying anyone by wanting to be independent," Grace said. "You taught me to be strong and self-sufficient. Did you think I would never want to use those skills for my own benefit?" Richard looked at her, and some of the fight seemed to drain out of him. "I thought you would stay," he said quietly. "I thought you would take care of the store and I would have family close by. Now you are planning to move 10 miles away and I will be alone." Grace felt her anger soften into understanding. Her father was not really angry about the store. He was scared of being left behind. "Papa, 10 miles is not that far. We can visit every week, and you will always be welcome at our place." "It will not be the same," Richard said, but his voice lacked conviction. "No, it will not," Grace agreed. "But change is not always bad. Maybe it is time for both of us to start new chapters." Richard sighed heavily and sat down in one of their chairs, suddenly looking every one of his 60 years. "Your mother would know what to say to you right now. She always knew how to handle you." Grace knelt beside him and took his hand. "What would Mama want for me?" "Really?" Richard was quiet for a long moment, then said, "She would want you to be happy. She would want you to follow your heart, even if it took you away from me." "Then give us your blessing," Grace said. "Please, Papa, I need to know you support this." Richard looked at Tucker, who had stayed silent, letting Grace handle her father. "You will take care of her. You will make sure she has everything she needs." "I will die before I let anything happen to her," Tucker said seriously. "That is what I am afraid of," Richard muttered, but he nodded. "All right. You have my blessing. But I expect you to visit regularly, and I want to see my grandchildren when they come along." Grace hugged him tight, feeling like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. "Thank you, Papa. Thank you so much." After Richard left, Grace and Tucker celebrated by opening the bottle of whiskey they had been saving for a special occasion. They sat on their porch, passing the bottle back and forth, and talking late into the night about their plans. "We are really doing this," Grace said, a little drunk and very happy. "We are starting our own business." "We are," Tucker confirmed, pulling her onto his lap. "You and me against the world." "I like the sound of that," Grace said, and she kissed him, tasting whiskey and possibility on his lips. The next 6 months were the busiest of Grace's life. They purchased the land and immediately set to work building the store. Tucker did most of the construction himself, working from dawn until dusk, while Grace continued to work at her father's store to keep money coming in. On Sundays, Grace would ride out to their land and help with what she could, fetching water and tools, painting the walls, deciding where everything would go. "It is starting to look like something," Tucker said one evening, stepping back to admire their work. The store was nearly finished, a solid structure of wood and stone with a covered porch and large windows to let in light. "It is looking like our future," Grace said, slipping her hand into his. They hired a few ranch hands to help finish the work, and by early spring of 1883, the store was ready to open. Grace had spent weeks preparing inventory, ordering supplies from wholesalers in Oklahoma City, setting up the books, everything she had learned from years of watching her father. They decided to call it Vaughn's General Store and Ranch Supplies, and Grace painted the sign herself in careful letters. The opening day was better than they could have hoped. Ranchers from all over the area came to see the new store, drawn by the promise of convenience and fair prices. Grace worked the counter while Tucker helped customers load supplies, and by the end of the day they had made more money than Grace had dared to hope for. "We did it," she said that night as they counted the day's earnings. "We actually did it." Tucker swept her up in his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing with joy and relief. "I never doubted you for a second," he said. "Liar," Grace said, but she was smiling. "We were both terrified." "Terrified but determined," Tucker corrected. "That is a Vaughn family trait now." "The Vaughn family," Grace repeated, liking the sound of it. "I like being part of a family again." "Speaking of family," Tucker said, setting her down and looking at her with an expression she could not quite read, "when do you think we should start thinking about children?" Grace's heart skipped a beat. They had talked about children in vague terms someday, eventually, but never seriously. "Are you saying you want to start trying?" "I am saying I want everything with you," Tucker said, cupping her face in his hands. "A house, a business, children, a whole life together. And I do not want to wait any more." Grace felt a flutter of nervousness mixed with excitement. "What if I am not a good mother? What if I am too stubborn and impatient?" "Then our children will be stubborn and impatient too," Tucker said with a grin. "And they will know they are loved because we will show them every single day." Grace thought about it, about a little boy with Tucker's dark eyes or a little girl with her red hair, and felt something shift inside her. "All right," she said. "Let us start a family." Tucker kissed her deeply, then picked her up and carried her to their bedroom, and that night they loved each other with a new sense of purpose and hope for the future. Grace discovered she was pregnant 3 months later, in the sweltering heat of summer. She had been feeling tired and queasy for weeks, but she had attributed it to the long hours at the store. When Mrs. Patterson mentioned that she looked peaked and asked if she might be expecting, Grace realized she had missed her monthly courses twice. She told Tucker that evening, nervous about his reaction. "I think I am pregnant," she said without preamble as soon as he walked through the door. Tucker froze, his hat halfway to the peg. "You think or you know?" "I am fairly certain," Grace said. "All the signs are there." A slow smile spread across Tucker's face, transforming it with joy. He crossed the room in 3 long strides and pulled her into his arms. "We are having a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Grace, we are having a baby. Are you happy?" Grace asked, even though she could see the answer on his face. "I am beyond happy," Tucker said. He knelt down and pressed his face to her still flat stomach. "Hello in there, little one. This is your papa. I cannot wait to meet you." Grace ran her fingers through his hair, feeling tears prick her eyes. "I am scared," she admitted. "What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot do this?" Tucker looked up at her, his eyes serious. "Then we will figure it out together, just like we always do." "You are the strongest woman I know, Grace. If anyone can do this, you can." The pregnancy was difficult. Grace was sick almost constantly for the first few months, unable to keep anything down and losing weight instead of gaining it. Tucker hovered over her constantly, bringing her ginger tea and crackers, rubbing her back when she was ill, worrying himself into knots. Grace tried to keep working at the store, but eventually she had to admit defeat and let Tucker hire someone to help. "I hate being useless," she complained one day as she lay on the settee in their living room, too tired to even sit up properly. "You are growing a whole human being," Tucker reminded her. "That is not useless." "It feels useless," Grace grumbled. "I should be working. The store needs me." "The store is fine," Tucker assured her. "John is doing a great job helping me and business is better than ever. You need to rest and take care of yourself and the baby." Grace knew he was right, but that did not make it any easier. She was not used to being dependent on anyone, to needing help with basic tasks. But as the months passed and her belly grew round and full, she began to adjust. Tucker was endlessly patient with her mood swings and complaints, and her father visited regularly, bringing gifts for the baby and awkwardly trying to offer advice. "Your mother was the same way when she was carrying you," Richard told her one afternoon as they sat together on the porch. "Stubborn as ever, insisted on working right up until her water broke, nearly gave birth in the store," Grace laughed. "I did not know that." "There is a lot you do not know about your mother," Richard said. His eyes got that far-away look they always did when he talked about his late wife. "She was remarkable, just like you." "Thank you, Papa," Grace said, touched by the rare compliment. The baby came on a cold February night in 1884, 2 weeks before Grace's due date. The labor was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours, and there were moments when Grace was certain she was going to die. Tucker stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, murmuring words of encouragement even as he looked terrified. "I cannot do this," Grace sobbed at one point, exhausted and in pain. "I cannot, Tucker. It is too much." "Yes, you can," Tucker said firmly. "You are Grace Vaughn and you can do anything. Just a little longer, sweetheart, just a little more." Finally, as dawn broke over the prairie, the baby came, slipping into the world with a loud, angry cry. The midwife cleaned him up and placed him in Grace's arms, and Grace looked down at her son's tiny, perfect face and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. "It is a boy," she whispered, touching his soft cheek with one finger. "Tucker, we have a son." Tucker was crying openly, tears streaming down his face as he looked at their baby. "He is perfect, Grace, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas Richard Vaughn, after Grace's lost fiancé and her father, and he had Tucker's dark hair and Grace's green eyes. Grace fell in love with him instantly, fiercely, in a way that was different from her love for Tucker but no less powerful. Being a mother was harder than Grace had anticipated. Thomas was a colicky baby, crying for hours on end no matter what they did. Grace was exhausted, running on little sleep, and overwhelmed by the constant demands of caring for an infant while also trying to help with the store when she could. There were days when she locked herself in the bedroom and cried from frustration and exhaustion. Days when she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. But Tucker was there through all of it, walking the floor with Thomas in the middle of the night so Grace could sleep, changing diapers without complaint, taking over the store completely so Grace could focus on their son. And slowly, gradually, things got easier. Thomas started sleeping through the night. Grace figured out a rhythm that worked for them. And one morning, about 4 months after Thomas was born, Grace woke up and realized she was happy. Truly, deeply happy in a way she had never been before. "Good morning," Tucker said, rolling over to face her. Thomas was asleep in his cradle next to the bed, one tiny fist curled near his mouth. "Good morning," Grace said, snuggling closer to her husband. "Have I told you lately that I love you? Not in the last 8 hours, Tucker teased. I was starting to worry. "I love you," Grace said seriously. I love you so much it scares me sometimes. I never knew I could feel this way about anyone." "I love you too," Tucker said, kissing her softly. "You and Thomas are my whole world." They lay there together, listening to their son's soft breathing, and Grace thought about how far she had come. A year and a half ago, she had been alone and convinced she was unlovable. Now she had a husband who adored her, a son who needed her, and a business that was thriving. She had built a life that was more than she had ever dreamed possible. The years passed quickly after that. Thomas grew from a fussy infant into a curious toddler who was into everything, exploring every corner of the store and getting underfoot constantly. Grace got pregnant again when Thomas was 2, and this time the pregnancy was easier. Their daughter, Mary Catherine, was born in the spring of 1886, a calm, content baby who was the complete opposite of her brother. "She has your temperament," Grace told Tucker as they watched Mary sleep peacefully in her cradle. "Thank goodness. I do not think I could handle another one like Thomas." "Thomas keeps life interesting," Tucker said diplomatically. "Thomas keeps life exhausting," Grace corrected, but she was smiling. They expanded the store as their business grew, adding a second building for feed and large equipment. Tucker finally got to start his horse breeding operation, building a small stable behind their house and bringing in a breeding pair of fine quarter horses. Grace managed the books and the ordering while also caring for the children, somehow finding time to do everything that needed to be done. "I do not know how you do it all," her father said one day, watching her juggle Mary on one hip while simultaneously helping a customer and keeping an eye on Thomas, who was playing with wooden blocks in the corner. "I just do," Grace said, shifting Mary to her other hip. "What choice do I have?" "You could hire more help," Richard suggested. "We have plenty of help," Grace said. "I like being busy. It keeps me from thinking too much." "Always were a worker," Richard said fondly, "just like your mother." Grace's father was getting older, moving more slowly and complaining about his joints. He had finally hired someone to manage his store in Kingfisher, spending more and more time at Grace and Tucker's place, playing with his grandchildren and offering advice that Tucker took with good grace. When Thomas was 5 and Mary was 3, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. She was surprised. They had not been trying for another child, but she was also pleased. She had always imagined having a large family, and now they could afford it. "3 children," Tucker said, shaking his head in wonder. "We are going to have 3 children." "Are you worried?" Grace asked, noting the expression on his face. "No," Tucker said. "I am grateful. I am so damn grateful for this life we have built together." Grace kissed him. "Me too." Every single day. Their third child, a boy they named James, was born in early 1887, and he had red hair like his mother and a calm disposition like his sister. With 3 children under 6, their house was chaotic and loud and always messy, but Grace had never been happier. She had found her purpose, not just in being a wife and mother, but in building something meaningful with Tucker, a business, a family, a life. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Tucker surprised her with a gift. He had been working on something in secret for weeks, disappearing into the stable for hours at a time, and Grace had been curious but willing to wait for the surprise. "Close your eyes," he told her on the morning of their anniversary. Grace obeyed, letting him lead her out to the stable. When he told her to open her eyes, she gasped. Standing in one of the stalls was the most beautiful mare she had ever seen, a sleek bay with a white star on her forehead and intelligent eyes. "She is yours," Tucker said. "I have been training her specifically for you. She is gentle and well-mannered, perfect for riding out to check on the ranch when I am working the store." Grace was speechless. The mare was perfect, absolutely perfect. "Tucker, I do not know what to say." You have been working so hard, taking care of the children and the store, and I wanted to give you something just for you," Tucker said. "Something that reminds you that you are more than just a wife and mother. You are Grace, the woman I fell in love with because she was strong and independent and fierce." Tears streamed down Grace's face. "I love her. What should we name her?" "That is up to you," Tucker said. Grace thought for a moment, running her hand along the mare's neck. "Hope," she said finally. "I want to name her Hope because she represents everything I have found with you." Tucker pulled her close and kissed her. "I love you, Grace Vaughn, more than I did the day we married, more than I did yesterday. I will keep loving you harder every single day for the rest of my life." "Good," Grace said, laughing through her tears, "because you are stuck with me now." Over the next few years, their life settled into a comfortable pattern. The children grew, the business flourished, and Grace and Tucker's love deepened with each passing season. They had their fights, certainly, Grace's stubbornness and Tucker's occasional pig-headedness clashing in spectacular arguments, but they always made up, always came back to each other stronger than before. When Thomas was 8, Mary was 6, and James was 4, Grace's father fell ill. It started as a cough that would not go away, and within a few months he was bedridden, too weak to get up. Grace spent as much time as she could at his side, bringing the children to visit, holding his hand and reading to him from the Bible. "I am proud of you," Richard told her one afternoon when they were alone. His voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "So very proud of the woman you have become." "Do not talk like that," Grace said, squeezing his hand. "You are going to get better." "We both know that is not true," Richard said. He smiled at her, and for a moment he looked like his old self again. "But I am not afraid. I have lived a good life, and I am ready to see your mother again." Grace could not stop the tears. "I am not ready to lose you." "You will never lose me," Richard said. "I will always be with you, Grace. In everything you do, in the way you raise your children, in the business you have built, I will always be there." Richard Grayson died peacefully in his sleep 2 days later with Grace holding his hand. The funeral was well attended, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to a man who had been a pillar of the community. Grace cried harder than she had since her mother died, mourning not just her father but the end of an era. "He loved you very much," Tucker told her as they stood by the grave after everyone else had left. The children were with friends, giving Grace time to grieve. "He was so proud of you and everything you accomplished." "I know," Grace said. "I just wish I had told him more often how much he meant to me." "He knew," Tucker assured her. "Trust me, he knew." In his will, Richard left his store in Kingfisher to Grace, along with a considerable amount of savings. Grace decided to keep the store running, hiring a manager to oversee the daily operations while she focused on their own business. The additional income allowed them to expand even more, buying more land and more horses, building a proper ranch house to replace the small house they had been living in. By 1892, 10 years after Grace and Tucker had first met, they had built an empire. Vaughn's Ranch was known throughout Oklahoma Territory for quality horses and fair dealing. They employed a dozen ranch hands and had expanded the store to include a small blacksmith operation and a veterinary supply section. Their children were healthy and happy, Thomas showing an interest in the horse breeding side of the business, Mary preferring to help her mother with the books, and James content to simply be a child, playing in the dirt and causing mischief. Grace was 32 years old, and she had everything she had never dared to dream of. She had a husband who loved her unconditionally, children who made her proud, and a business that was successful beyond her wildest imaginings. She still had her moments of stubbornness and sharp words, still struggled sometimes with letting people in, but Tucker had kept his promise. He had loved her harder, through every fight and every fear, until she finally believed what he had been telling her all along, that she was not difficult to love at all. One evening, as they sat on the porch of their new house watching the sunset, Grace turned to Tucker and said, "Do you remember what you told me the day you proposed? That you would love me harder?" "I remember," Tucker said, taking her hand. "You kept your promise," Grace said. "You loved me through every stubborn moment, every time I pushed you away, every fear and doubt. You loved me until I learned to love myself." Tucker brought her hand to his lips and kissed it. "It was not hard, Grace. Loving you has been the easiest thing I have ever done." "I love you," Grace said, "more than I can ever express. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." "You gave me the same," Tucker said. "A home, a family, a reason to wake up every morning. You are my whole world, Grace Vaughn." They sat together in comfortable silence, their hands linked, watching as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars began to appear. Thomas came out and sat on the steps, followed by Mary and James, and Grace looked at her family, this beautiful, imperfect family she had built, and felt a contentment so profound it brought tears to her eyes. "What are you crying about, Mama?" Mary asked, concerned. "Happy tears, sweetheart," Grace assured her. "Just happy tears." Tucker squeezed her hand, understanding without words. This was their life, the life they had built together against all odds, and it was better than anything Grace could have imagined on that day years ago when she had stood in her father's store and thought she was too difficult to love. She had been wrong. She was not difficult to love. She had just needed to find someone brave enough to love her the way she needed to be loved, hard and fierce and without reservation. And Tucker had done that. He had loved her through her stubbornness and her fears until she learned to open her heart, and in doing so, he had given her a gift more precious than anything else in the world. He had given her a life worth living, a family worth cherishing, and a love that would last forever. The years continued to pass, marked by graduations and marriages and grandchildren. Thomas married a sweet girl from a neighboring ranch and took over the horse breeding operation, expanding it until Vaughn horses were known throughout the Southwest. Mary married a lawyer and moved to Oklahoma City, but she visited often with her growing family. James surprised everyone by becoming a teacher, opening a school in Kingfisher and dedicating himself to educating the children of the territory. Grace and Tucker grew old together, their hair turning gray, their hands becoming gnarled with age, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of partnership and shared experiences. They had weathered droughts and economic downturns, illness and loss, joy and triumph, and through it all they had stayed together, two stubborn souls who had found in each other exactly what they needed. On their 50th wedding anniversary in 1932, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The house was filled with people, children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, friends and neighbors who had known them for decades. Grace stood in the middle of it all, Tucker's arm around her waist, and marveled at the life they had built. 50 years, Tucker said, shaking his head. "Hard to believe. Best 50 years of my life," Grace said. She looked up at him, seeing past the wrinkles and gray hair to the young cowboy who had walked into her father's store all those years ago. "I would do it all over again exactly the same way." "Even the hard parts?" Tucker asked. "Especially the hard parts," Grace said, "because those are the moments that made us who we are." Tucker kissed her, soft and sweet, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. Their oldest grandson made a toast, talking about the legacy of love and hard work that his grandparents had built, and Grace felt tears streaming down her face, happy tears for the life she had lived and the family she had raised. That night, after all the guests had left and they were alone in their bedroom, Tucker held her close and said, "I told you that you were not difficult to love." Grace laughed, the sound a little rusty with age but still genuine. "You did, and you proved it every single day." "I love you, Grace Vaughn," Tucker said, "just as much now as the day I married you, more even." "I love you too," Grace said. "Thank you for loving me harder. Thank you for never giving up on me." "Never," Tucker promised. "Not then, not now, not ever." They fell asleep in each other's arms, two people who had found in each other the love of a lifetime, and Grace knew with absolute certainty that she was the luckiest woman alive. She had been given a second chance at happiness, and she had seized it with both hands. She had learned to love and be loved, to open her heart despite the fear. And in doing so she had found everything she had ever wanted. The stubborn bride who had once believed she was too difficult to love had discovered the truth. She was not difficult at all. She had simply been waiting for the right cowboy to come along, one who was brave enough and stubborn enough and loving enough to see past her walls to the woman underneath. And Tucker Vaughn had been exactly that man, the one who loved her harder, the one who never gave up, the one who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. And that, Grace thought as she drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man she had loved for 50 years, was the greatest gift of all.